CSAT was becoming such a problematic metric because of all of the kind of angle that it was coming from. We were worrying more about the metric than we were about the feedback.
Welcome to The Ticket. I'm Bobby Stapleton, Senior Director of Human Support here at Intercom. Today we're talking about a big shift in how we measure customer experience. Last week at our Built For You event in London, we launched the Customer Experience Score, or CX Score for short, as our new AI-powered metric that gives you real-time insight into every support conversation. No surveys needed, no guesswork. But before it launched, a few of our customers had early access to trial it, and one of them was CultureAmp. Today, I'm joined by Ellis, their Senior Director of Global Product, to talk about what it was like switching from CSAT over to the CX Score, what it revealed about his team's performance, and how they're using to drive real improvement. Jared, welcome to the show, man. So good to have you here.
Bobby, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So yeah, just to give some context for our listeners, what do we mean exactly when we say the CX Score? Well, we believe that CSAT is a broken way to measure your customer experience. It's unreliable and it only captures a tiny fraction of your conversations, normally less than 10%. And so that's why we've spent nearly a year building something better. So the CX Score is our new AI-powered metric that solves the core problems with CSAT. It gives you full coverage across every conversation, not just the ones that get a survey, and it scores them from 1 to 5 based on resolution, sentiment, and service quality. And what it's already showing our early adopters is eye-opening. Your human support may not be as good as you think, and your AI agents are often overperforming. So these are the kinds of uncomfortable truths we need to face if we want to genuinely improve the experience that we're delivering to all of our customers. So with all that said, Jared, you and your team at CultureAmp got early access to the CX Score before we launched it last week. So I'd love to hear what stood out to you when you first heard about it and what made you want to test it out.
It's such an interesting question because customer satisfaction CSAT has been around. We in support are very familiar with it and kind of consider it our bread and butter when we're trying to measure the effectiveness of the services that we are running and creating and trying to improve. So when this customer experience score kind of popped up and I heard about it, it just triggered something in me that went, oh, I'd never thought about it that way. Just the idea of being able to get the insights or some form of insight from just about every conversation that your team is having is suddenly a treasure trove. It kind of sounds very exciting on the box. So I was really keen to get my hands on it to kind of see if it lived up to the promise that it gave out.
I think that word triggering is probably an apt word. Like you said, if you search CSAT on LinkedIn, you're going to find a million different like hot takes, whether people love it, hot takes, whether people love it. I feel like it can be somewhat triggering metric. And we'll talk more about that later on the teammate experience side. Like, was it a exciting feeling for you, like a curiosity, or you were like, oh man, these are these pains that I've been feeling. And I feel like maybe this is finally an answer. Like, tell me more about that.
Yes, it's so interesting because it came at a time when I was feeling the pain of it just right at that given moment. Serendipitous kind of situation. I was having my team come to me a lot more frequently and the managers within my group kind of coming to me and talking about CSAT. What does this mean? This doesn't seem fair. This isn't giving me the insight. I'm finding it really hard to coach on. In fact, one of my managers came to me and said, I haven't had a single CSAT response that I've been able to coach one of my team members on for about 2 or 3 months. So it was kind of hitting me, bombarding me, and then this opportunity arose to have a look at customer experience score.
I feel like that's such a relatable experience for our listener. That idea of like, yes, we want customer feedback. Like, yes, that insight is valuable. But like, if I'm trying to coach Bobby, tell him how he can do his job better. Like when you're missing those pieces and all you're getting are these like snippets. That really resonates. So I want to hear more about this trial in just a moment. But before we move on, like once you started using this and clicking around, playing around with it, like what stood out to you? What were like some of the surprises?
Do you know what? It wasn't surprising. And that was the surprise. When I went through it, it felt very familiar. It felt like it was doing a very similar job to CSAT overall, which is kind of the goal, right? It's meant to be something that is predictive of a similar type measure as CSAT. And I think what the surprise for me is that it did. And the feedback that it was producing was something that was quite actionable, that was understandable, and that, I felt like teammates could actually do something with.
That's awesome. I love that. So let's talk more about this trial that you're running with the team. Like, tell us what this trial is, and yeah, what made you decide that it was the right time to rethink your team's performance metrics?
Yeah, well, you just gave away the big reveal there. The trial that we're running was really about switching gears and actually moving from using traditional CSAT as one of our key performance indicators to using the new customer experience score. So as I mentioned, it was all coming at me at the same time. I was getting a lot of feedback on the customer satisfaction from the team, the want and desire to kind of understand it further and actually find actionable feedback from it that wasn't really coming about. So the trust was really low in CSAT. And I had been looking at customer experience scores for a couple of months effectively when I made this decision to do the trial. Kind of got to that point and I went, you know what? Let's switch it all over. It can always be switched off. It can always be changed if it doesn't quite work effectively. But like CSAT, that we all have years and years of experience of understanding what could that mean? What is the driver behind particular outcomes? What do we ignore? What do we listen to? We've got a lot of experience in that, but it's experience built from working with it. So I figured the only way that we were going to see how customer experience score could actually help us would be to work with it. So that was kind of the basis of the trial. So yeah, as of the beginning of this order, we are effectively going to be using that as our key performance indicator.
I love that. And yeah, I'll have some questions later about like dive into the team change management side. But you mentioned before we move on, though, you mentioned that snippet around just like not trusting CSAT. And again, I feel like that is that can be this like universal sentiment across support teams. You mentioned like when to take the feedback versus like when to exclude it. And I imagine if we got a room of 20 support leaders all together, we would probably all be saying the same thing. If it's like, well, if it's like feedback for a bug, like there's only so much you should do with that. And so, yeah, I would love to hear like what else kind of made you feel like you couldn't quite trust CSAT. Like, and yeah, tell us more there.
It's really hard. I think you hit the nail on the head. There is a lot of assuming intent behind CSAT feedback. So when we receive that score back, we all sit there and go, is that what the customer meant? Are they actually upset about that? We're trying to read between the lines of something that we can't read between the lines of unless we went and had that conversation with that customer and were really annoying effectively to be like, well, why did you give us that score? Let us, go through those processes, which at scale is just impossible to really do. And also you're trying to change one score in what could be a large quantity of them. So the output just wasn't quite there. I think the trust also was there that I don't know, maybe we can all relate this to a little bit at the moment, probably a lot at the moment, is that we felt the vibe of people when they were giving feedback was starting to go down a little bit of a darker path, and the smaller things are really coming into play for people. There was definitely a big shift over the last couple of years in terms of what kind of feedback we were getting, which was probably doing the opposite of what we wanted to do with a metric like this, which is we want to encourage the team. We want the team to get better. We want the team to want to get better as they use these kind of metrics as a path effectively. And CSAT was becoming such a problematic metric because of all of the kind of angle that it was coming from and trying to dive into understanding. We were worrying more about the metric than we were about the feedback. And I think that was the key thing.
That's such a smart quote, like worrying more about the metric than the actual feedback. And I feel like whether it's like the metric, how it's calculated, I had a team meeting. We were reviewing the previous week. And we're like, why did CSAT go down? We spent like 20 minutes just talking about the survey mechanics of it's like, well, we changed our follow up flow. So it's sent 36 hours later instead of 24. We were just so in the minutia. And it's like, this is like like you said, it's missing the point. Like we want to hear how is the customer experience? What can we do to be better? And we're sitting here talking about survey mechanics. We're missing the bigger picture. So can we definitely relate to that?
Yeah, it's such a good point. We spend a lot of time operationally trying to tweak all the things surrounding it, which is something that had come to mind as well as another part of CSAT that was just complicated.
Yeah, and just like now with the customer experience score, it's like it's there, it's on, you get it for everything. Let's actually talk about the feedback. So awesome. One of the reasons I was really excited to do this conversation with you is that, like, Culture Amp, like, you guys are such an insights focus, surveys are your bread and butter. You're such a data-driven company. I love your newsletter. You guys are just, like, so freaking smart, like, and so I imagine something like this, thinking about CSAT versus a customer experience score, you're bringing a level of, like, sophistication to how you're thinking about this type of switch. So, yeah, just, like, tell us more about that, like, how has like again that high bar that you guys have at Culture Amp, like how has that impacted your view of CSAT and now the customer experience score?
It's probably counterintuitive actually to be making this move in comparison to what we typically do because we are an employee experience product, and our bread and butter is very much around measuring the employee experience, hearing the employee's voice in order to make change for the better, and all of those good things. If really this trial is or making the switch at least is maybe cutting out one of the voices that we would value the strongest within the context of Culture Amp. So that definitely came to mind when I was reviewing this as to, feedback is so important to us. One of our values as a company is learning faster through feedback. The good thing is that where I kind of came from is the quantity and quality of feedback is extraordinarily important to our kind of scientific methodology when we're measuring the employee experience. And I think we had entered a realm with customer satisfaction where the feedback was no longer kind of hitting that quality. And we definitely didn't have the quantity in order to really find the actionable results out of it, which is another element of why customer experience score really stood out to me. That opportunity to hit on a larger number, in fact, close to all of our interactions being able to be rated was almost an exciting Christmas prospect for me to actually have.
You mentioned giving up the customer, like the direct customer feedback. Like, have you thought about or played around with the idea of, like, is there a world where you're using both? Or, like, yeah, walk us through your thought process to that and, like, any advice you'd be giving support leaders who I'm sure are going through that same mental back and forth that you're going through.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know if I've landed on the right answer just yet. The way I'm approaching it initially is to run both. So we continue with having traditional CSAT and customer experience score kind of running simultaneously. Throughout the trial, we'll be focusing mainly on customer experience score, at least from our team and our teammate perspective. However, I'm still checking both just to make sure that, there isn't anything in there, and also for the comparison value. I think one of the powerful things of having both is being able to compare the two of them. That was a real unlock for me. So, at least in these initial phases. But one thing that really stood out to me, and in fact, one of my team actually pulled out very early on, they was like, does that mean we can stop asking for surveys? And that's a really interesting prospect because I've also had a number of conversations over the last couple of years with our customer base who have actually put the ask in, hey, can you stop sending me CSAT surveys? I'll give you feedback directly if I want to give you feedback. Can you take me off the list? And, some trickery with some workflows, and we exclude them from actually receiving that. But that was coming up more frequently than I'd ever seen before in the past. And it made me really realize that we're getting bombarded with so many requests for feedback and for our opinion on things just in the world at large. And this could be a really big opportunity to say, look, you don't need to give us that feedback. You don't need to answer that. We're not going to annoy you about it. We're not going to do that. But then there's the flip side. How do we create new paths for customers to have a voice within our support organizations? How do we get feedback back in if we shut off that particular pathway? That's the answer I don't have, but it's definitely something that I'm noodling on, let's say.
Yeah. Well, and what I'm hearing from you is this, like, this mutual trust and respect and, like, partnership with your customer base. And like you said, it's like not sending them this survey that's wordsmith a certain way. I got a survey from an airline once that was like, if you were talking to Bobby, would you hire him for a support team? And I'm like, that's such a weird way to phrase the CSAT question, but okay.
It's extreme.
And so it's like just like having this trust and respect to be like, okay, like, I'm here. We want your feedback. You have something to share, but yeah, we're not going to bombard you. But still, again, having that pulse that you need to make sure the customer experience is good. It's a smart way to be thinking about it.
Yeah, and I'm exploring, is it a different type of survey? Is it a click me and take the survey optional kind of avenue? Is it, have you got feedback for us? You can always stop off at this link and leave us feedback at any time. Um, there's a myriad of possibilities, probably a bunch that I haven't thought of, but it's kind of exciting to think we don't have to bombard them at the end of every conversation. And what the pros and cons of that are. Is that going to feel weird to a customer? Has it become so ingrained in our day-to-day lives that when we finish a conversation with a support or a customer service type like a company, am I feeling like I'm being cut off and I don't have a voice? Like, what is going to be the reciprocal feeling for those customers if we do remove it? Knowing it's kind of annoying, and they probably agree, but they're probably gonna have this other opinion, I suspect, as well.
And it's such an interesting, that's a bad adjective, but I feel like that anecdote really exemplifies this, like, time of change that we're in this new, like, AI first world where it's like, like, how will people's behaviors change and adapt along with this, like, with this new technology, and, like, that's the fun of this
Mm.
learning curve, and to give you guys the credit, the importance of, like, getting on this train now and, figuring it out early, so let's talk people. Like, how did you bring the team along on this change? Again, I imagine it's a big shift. CSAT scores are such a personal thing. You get the dopamine hit when you see that star eye response, as well as that like gut crunching anger, sadness when you see the unhappy, and you're like, "But I did everything I could for you." This is such like a staple of the industry, and especially for our teammates in the inbox. So, like, what framing or vision did you use to help it land with the team and bring them along as well?
I think the good thing is that, as I mentioned, there was a bit of an air around of mistrust coming through in CSAT, and also a diminished value being felt from the CSAT. So, timing is everything, as they always say, and I definitely leveraged that avenue to be like, look, we're seeing this diminishing trust. We're seeing how it's impacting you and deflating you as a team. What we want to do is try something new. I think that was the really important aspect. Is I try to frame it from the, we're going to try this. The CSAT, what you're used to, is going to sit there in the background. It'll still be there. We can literally turn this off at a blink of an eye and go back to a previous way. But we think this could be better. We think that we might get more insight. There might be more actionable information out of these ratings than what you've previously experienced. And so I sold it kind of from that direction of, let's go on a journey together. I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything about it. I haven't got that experience that I have with CSAT, and predicting what CSAT looks like from customers in a support organization. But we can do this together. And I kind of need them because I can't read all of the ratings now for every single conversation that we had in order to garner the insight and do the quick study that I need to be an expert in customer experience score. So it's a little bit of a shared journey for us all.
I love that sentiment of bringing them along. And again, our teams are so smart. They're in the front lines. They experience this every day. Was there ever any like, I don't know, like hesitancy or, assuming that this is a KPI that they're accountable to, it's tied to the performance, maybe that goes back to performance reviews. Like, was there ever any, not skepticism, but was there ever any like fear of like, yeah, like we can do this, Jared, but as long as it's making me look good, or like, oh, like we can do this as long as it's not going to impact like my pay at the end of the day. Like, was there like, yeah, like how do you kind of find that balance of like using it as a serious metric, even as part of a pilot, but also having that grace for, the learning curve?
I think setting the target was a really big part of that. And to answer the question, yes, there was definitely not heavy pushback. I think the biggest part that came out when over the time, I mean, it's only been a couple of weeks since we started doing this, and the team had a lot of questions. A lot of it came down to trying to understand how it worked more so than anything else. So there was this curiosity, rightfully so, of kind of, well, if I do this, what's the outcome going to be? There's this kind of experimental curiosity that was coming through from them to try and work out the boundaries. Where can I step? Where can't I step? What might I need to change? What does the rating actually mean? And as we know, with generative AI, when you throw something inside, what you get out may not always make sense compared to what you put in there in a way that's easily explainable, because it just takes so many different things into consideration. It's got so many different aspects that are going to come into play, many of which we can't see. So I think that's has been and will continue to be the biggest challenge of helping the team understand that they're not going to understand if they try and think about it in the same way they did with CSAT. Oh, this customer is angry, therefore I'll be extra helpful and do it in this case. There's some equations that we get into the habit of, or yeah, some of those boundaries we kind of understand because there's a human on the other side. What are the boundaries of this? We're going to have to experiment and kind of learn from it. If we input this, it's going to kind of go into this direction and then adapt. And that might mean a slower start. That might mean some dips when new things present themselves, but that's part of the journey and an opportunity for them. Yeah, because what I think is really important here is that already it's uncovered opportunities and ways to think about conversations that we hadn't been thinking of in the past. It kind of presented new avenues of things. One of the big ones that has constantly come up since we kind of started is what happens if we can't do something for a customer? And there is this kind of neutral-esque response from a rating in customer experience score as a result of not being able to do it. And it's sometimes, depending on how the customer is, can even fall into the negative approach. And it's like, well, how do we combat that? How do we go against it? And there's kind of two answers that we've come up with. The first answer is we cop it. We take it on board. That's just part of the journey that we're on, and we set the targets taking that into consideration, because not every day we come against something like that. But what I've been really curious at, and what I've seen a few of my team experimenting with is, well, what if we change how we actually answer those type of queries? What if we put in an extra 10% and actually see what we can do? If it's something we can't do because they need to contact someone else, what happens if I actually connect them with that person? What if we don't have a product feature that somebody's really looking for? What if I submit that feedback, give them the summary there, and talk to them about our roadmap, for example? These are different behaviors brought on by the fact that, like, how do I actually resolve this query without being able to resolve it? So it's just interesting, unlocks, different thought patterns of how we approach things, which CSAT definitely didn't always provide.
Yeah, and oh, that's so fascinating. And I feel like again, just really paints the picture of like this new way of doing support where yeah, in the old world of like in the old world of a CSAT survey, how did Bobby do? Like the customer might not even say like, hey, you didn't solve my issue and I'm upset about it, because they're just going to say like, well, I don't want to give out about Bobby, he tried his best. And like you're not even giving that feedback, someone's still walking away upset with your product, maybe even a little upset with your service. And so to use this customer experience score to be able to like challenge the team and to just try to go a little bit further and to push back on some of these, again, to push back on some of these norms, I think again, all customer support teams fall accustomed to is yeah, it's just so fascinating and really, really cool to hear how it's helping.
Definitely.
You mentioned the team wanting to try and like pick it apart, right? And again, I think again that's such a trait of customer support folks. We're like, we want to look under the hood, we want to know how this works. Again, not that we want to try to game it, but like, yeah, we want to try to push the boundaries and know all the little edge cases and nuances. And yeah, having to like let go of some of that, like, was that yeah was that a hard change management? Like, was there time where you like messaged us at Intercom? You're like, guys, give me the prompt, because that's the behind the scenes that we have. Like we can go into the the product page and see the different prompts that they're working with.
A good opportunity to shout out the product team that are responsible for customer experience score, because I definitely bugged them a fair bit over the last month of being like, you don't have any documentation for this, and I need to understand more about what's actually going into this, because I'm getting these questions from my team as to what makes it up, what the kind of parameters are. And they've been superstars of effectively writing the article for me as I ask questions and adding in the detail that I need. But it's tricky because I don't think that, to draw back on that generative AI, large language model aspect, the reason we need such big computers to do this is because we can't fathom this kind of, we can't fathom this kind of level of information and understand exactly how it's all going to stitch together quite like it can. And that's the perceived magic of generative AI, right? So I don't know if we will ever get to a point where we will be able to completely understand the reasoning behind why customer experience score is set at what it is for a particular conversation and know all of the boundaries of why it may come to a conclusion in relation to that. But I think that's okay because there's something human about that. We don't always know in support world why it's a good conversation. But when it's a good conversation, we know. We know when it's there. And I think this is that version of what we do so naturally and so normally every day.
It's such a good framework. It's easy to fall into the trap with AI to be like, well, I want to know everything. And to your point, it's like, okay, like, well, show me your best teammate and have like 10 people say, like, well, why do you think they're the best? Like they're the best. And you probably get a lot of different answers. Like you said, there's this kind of intangible intuition, trusting your gut aspect of knowing that. So it's not fair to be okay with that on the human side and have a different bar on the AI side.
It's a great point, actually. Trying to see the same of both, or at least treating them in the way that is necessary, is a big step when using something like a customer experience score. Understanding what it is trying to do, what it's trying to achieve, is really helpful in that respect. And don't expect it to do something that is just not possible because it's not possible for us.
Right. Of that. You mentioned setting the customer experience score targets. I'd love to hear more about that. Like, yeah, how did you decide on the targets? How did that change over time? And like, yeah, and how's like again any response from the team or like working with them while also setting the target?
Yeah, look, it was a journey. It hasn't changed over time. I've had a couple of different opinions of it. And also, I know the team did a little bit of a change to how it was operating 2 months ago, which meant it kind of shifted how I was looking at it as well, to a much better place. But that was a kind of now I need to recalibrate based on that. But the calibration process was probably the trickiest part of the transition because until you know what number you're looking for, it's really hard to know if something is good or bad or needs attention or, should be celebrated. We all know that in our own support organizations and with our own customer bases. If you see a CSAT score for a team that is X number, you know that X equals a particular thing. You know exactly where it fits on that scale. Well, with customer experience score, the scale changed and I didn't know what it was. So I didn't know how to read it. I didn't know whether we were doing good, where we were doing bad, where I needed to start. So it was kind of going back down to basics. I effectively firstly did comparisons. So I looked at known good and, not so good CSAT responses and compared what the customer experience score was actually producing to gauge whether there was an alignment there. And there was generally an alignment. But then I had to factor in the fact that you get a lot more responses out of customer experience score than you do out of CSAT, which means the kind of statistical opportunity for there to be more in a particular category changes. We get a lot more neutral outcomes when we look at customer experience score, which is unusual because, as we all know, CSAT tends to lean either heavily on either end of the scale. So suddenly we've got this very big middle ground that we have to take into consideration when we look at, all right, we want a certain percentage to be in positive or highly positive. How do you then scale what that number is, take into consideration the neutral? So I effectively just put all of this into my head and then just started experimenting and started comparing those teammates who I know have consistently good CSAT outcomes to see where their customer experience score was sitting, reviewing conversations that seemed kind of outside of that, both on both sides to try and see where it was, and got a number in my head from doing that to kind of see what good meant to me. And then I use that as a gauge to kind of go, well, what's the baseline? Where do I want everyone to be above? What is the recognition point just based on the skew around that particular recognition? So, as I say, it was a bit of a journey. And again, we are so experienced using CSAT. We can all talk to exactly what good in CSAT is and what is probably problematic or somewhere we need to put attention on things without a lot of context, even to the product or the organization that is relevant for. This is a little bit of a new one, so I think it's going to take a little bit of, and because you're doing everything, I think it's going to be unique. I'd be intrigued to hear how other people kind of rate good or rate their baseline when they're looking at this in the future, to compare notes, to kind of understand, is it the same? Now that we're looking at every conversation, which we've never kind of looked at before, unless you have an incredible customer group who are giving you feedback on every conversation every single time, this is the first time we've got so much volume in there. I wonder what that does when it comes down to the type of product, the type of service, and the type of customer we've got.
And that point on the neutrals really resonates. I think as support leaders, to a degree, we've maybe had our head in the sand a little bit about the amount of neutrals. And, I think we all, it was the unspoken rule of it's like, well, if they're not responding, it's like, NPS says that they're probably unhappy. Maybe best case, they're just neutral and went on with their day. So to now have to face that. And it's like you said, to either figure out how can we bump some of those up from that 3 customer experience score rated 3 up to a 4 or a 5, as well as like, yeah, like what's going to just be a normal kind of number for that, given the fact that it is across, every single conversation. So thousands and thousands kinds of conversations a week, like just kind of calibrating and getting and adjusting to that is part of the process.
It's exciting. It's definitely something that I'm excited about. We've never had this neutral ground, not to the extent that this brings about, in order to really find actionable feedback that we can then switch over, as you mentioned, into those 4s or 5s and bring them up to that good end. Normally, we're only looking at the other end, the 1s and 2s end, the sad faces. We're looking at those and then like, well, we need to turn those around. We need to improve those. That's the bulk of what we're looking at when we're looking at CSAT. We now have this neutral ground where we're not doing something terrible here to that customer experience. Customer probably walks away and says, "Yeah, that was fine." But what we actually want is, "Yeah, that was great." And it's so interesting that we now get that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I love it. When talking about setting the target, I would love to hear what this was like for you at Cultramp. Like, we had this meeting with our executive team and we had put like our customer experience score for the month was an 88, and they were like, "Wow, that's really good." And to your point, it had shot up after on the product side we had changed some of the algorithms. So we're like, "Oh, we think things are going better. Like, we know first response times are better right now, but also this is just like we're still in that process of baselining." So we, watch this space. But yeah, I would love to hear like, has there been a process for you having to kind of calibrate or socialize this outside of the support team with, whether that's, with other stakeholders?
Thankfully, not yet, but I've kind of planned ahead for it. The way that I introduced this to the broader business and our executive team was I wrote a white paper, an internal white paper that basically described what it was, how it was going to change, what it was going to do to our score in terms of the one that we were going to give to them effectively and say, this is how the support team are doing from a customer lens. So I did a bit of the groundwork in advance. But I fully anticipate when it does switch from 90s to 80s in terms of where we're at, maybe hopefully not by the time we get to that point in time, but how we actually portray that and say, well, if you're doing a direct comparison, it's not going to be a consistent story here. So yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation. But I know from the people I've spoken to about it in response to what I've shared, they're excited about the prospect. They're excited about the opportunity to get more insight and excited to do things like we've covered across this whole conversation. Things like maybe not having to annoy our customers anymore. Maybe that means they could pay more attention to things like other forms of measurement that we would like to do in terms of their experience with our product and not feel like we're bombarding with all of these avenues in every direction. And then other things like being able to have that center neutral ground actually reviewed and actually have feedback on it, so we can say, hey, we're focusing on moving the middle ground to be the upper ground, that is neutrals into those highly positives. We're actually focusing some attention into that area, which is improvement. It is something that is progressive and a new opportunity. So, give them the full picture. don't just concentrate on the score.
More than just the number. How has our customer experience score helped you improve Finn, our AI agents, and versus just teammates?
This is interesting. We have so many avenues, so many great avenues for reviewing what Fin is saying to customers. There's so much reporting, there's so much insight, perhaps even too much sometimes for the volume that Fin actually does. We haven't dove a lot into actually using customer experience score for Fin. We have had a lot of conversations internally about how might we. And I think one of the interesting things for us is what do we want to get out of it? And I'll use a comparison here, which is maybe helpful about where our brain is we did this a similar thing when we were reviewing customer experience score against QA and quality assurance. And also taking into consideration with quality assurance, whether we should do AI-driven quality assurance, whether we should have AI do our QA, as well as then have customer experience score, which is of course AI-driven as well. And what I really landed on is that the thing we were measuring in QA was very much about whether the information that our team were telling our customers, whether it was correct factually, whether it was the right guidance, whether it was the correct process, all of these things which AI can't determine. It's great if you want to take into consideration sentiment and tone and have you spelt everything correctly and have you done grammar. AI QA is a great avenue for that particular aspect, but it's not very good at actually answering the questions that ultimately we care about the most when we do QA. Did we do what we needed to do correctly, aligned with our product? Is the information right? Those things. So the conversations have very much gone down the similar pathway as when we look at Fin, what we want to make sure is that whether it can answer the question or it can't, whether the information is actually right that's in there. And that's the one thing that another AI is not also going to be able to determine there. It's interesting to see it, but I'm more gaining from it as opposed to that side of the fence. I think what's the most interesting to me is actually how our customers feel about our AI-driven experience, how they feel about Fin. And I think that pops up. That's the most valuable aspect. And I don't know if that necessarily allows us to improve the quality of Fin's responses directly, but it does give us really valuable feedback in terms of how we develop our experience and how we talk about Fin within our support service and how we teach our customers about it and how we encourage its use and even how our team works side by side with it. So I think that's the other aspect here. It's understanding when our customers are maybe crashing through Fin because they don't believe that it's going to be able to help them, and they get to the teammate, and then the teammate is not working with it to try and encourage maybe the use of it or calling back to the information that are provided, therefore not building the confidence that we need and the trust that we need in order to really holistically give the best service, which Fin is able to provide. It was a really long pathway round, but I think we got there.
No, that's fantastic, and it's such a smart answer, Jared, and you really touch on the nuance to all of this, and like you said, this is nuance that we all know when thinking about the human experience. Like you said, the difference between a teammate, like, did they spell things correctly versus did they follow this workflow that they like we have to do correctly each time? Like we all know that those are two different things. Those are two different gradings. Those are maybe two different ways to assess, two different like importance for coaching. And the nuance of like we can't just throw AI at everything to magically have it tell us if everything's good or bad. It's like there is nuance to the jobs to be done that it's doing, and whether that's like for the conversations, whether that's like QA or whether like on the AI agent side, you have to kind of look at all these things with a little difference and yeah, with some of that specificity and having kind of a strategy for each of it. So anyways, I feel like that's like you're on some next level support leader AI stuff. We need to put all that like put all that into video for people to think about.
It's really easy when it's just thinking about it. It's a little bit more difficult than when you start to think about how you work with that and how you actually put it into practice, and you grow and make a better experience out of it. And I think on that point, the biggest challenge we have as support leaders in this AI world is actually bringing customers along with the journey. And customers are on the journey. A lot of users are now very used to the concept of AI, which is very different to where we were only a couple of years ago. But there's still an element of, I don't want to say PTSD, but let's say PTSD for the sake of it, in bot interactions. And there is also a lot of perspective or assumption that people make when it comes down to utilizing these automated type experiences as to you're diminishing the service you want to provide to me. There's this perception that that is ultimately a negative onto them as the user or the customer. But in fact, what we're trying to do is actually, with AI, for probably the first time, is actually enhance the experience because it can do things that we can't. And then we leave our team to be able to do the things that only they can do and really up level that. Like it's an exciting shift that only benefits the customer at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's no longer this deflection mechanism. It really is enhancing. I love that. Last question for all the other support leaders who are curious about customer experience score, but maybe on the fence. What advice would you give them to check this out, or advice that you would give them before rolling something like this out?
The best thing I did was jump in and start looking at it and start getting it really familiar, get really familiar with it. And the great thing is it can run in the background. You don't need to look at the report. You don't even need to dive into it. You don't need to understand that number. You can just have it. Well, it's running. It's there. It's available to you, which means unlike a lot of, other things, you can kind of dip your toe in a little bit and you can start to bring it into your own thinking. And I think as leaders, bringing in new thinking, even in a small amount, is such a good opportunity and creates that pathway. Because I think everyone's pathway towards this is going to be slightly different because it is such an important aspect of what we do. But yeah, as leaders, I think we have to be aware of it and start to consider it. There are thousands of metrics that we could, probably not thousands, but a lot of metrics we could take into consideration every day within our support organizations. We don't look at all of them. It's impossible. We can't metric against all of them. We can't try and shift all of them in a positive direction. You would just end up running around in circles and actually getting nowhere. So we all have our favorites. I think you spoke about this at the earlier on. We've all got our favorites, and we've also got the ones we don't necessarily like. The one thing that is true is we share an understanding of the majority of them together. And I think this is just might be the new kid on the block, but it's the kid that's going to hang around. It's going to grow up, it's going to go through school, and it's going to be here for us in the future, and it's probably going to redefine some other metrics. So it's worthwhile getting to know it. And if you want to then pursue it, you're going to know when the time is right based on your own organization. But you got to know it first.
That's a really great advice, Jared. And yeah, thank you so much for the chat here today. I look forward to chatting soon, to hearing about how your trial is going and checking in on it.
Sounds great. Thanks, Bobby.
Thanks again to Jared for the conversation and for being one of the first to trial something we believe will completely change how support teams measure success. If you want to learn more, there's a link in the description. And now, to show you exactly how CX Score works, here's Christine Zedler, Director of Product Management at Intercom.
Customer behavior has evolved. Technology has advanced. And yet, CSAT remains unchanged, outdated, and insufficient. Traditional surveys like CSAT capture only a small slice of interactions and often overrepresent extreme opinions. That leaves a lot of customers left unheard. But no longer. Enter the CX Score, a breakthrough AI-powered metric that gives you a complete view of your support quality across every customer conversation. No surveys required. Now, let's get into the product and I'll show you how it works. So we'll start with the customer experience report. At the top is your overall CX score. It's a percentage calculated from conversations based on a 1 to 5 scale. It's based on 100% of your meaningful conversations, so you get far more coverage than traditional surveys. In fact, most customers see 5 times more rated conversations. In this example, almost 25,000 conversations were assessed automatically, and each rating is driven by 3 key signals. Customer sentiment, which analyzes the emotional tone and language used throughout the conversation. Resolution status, we detect whether the customer's issue was resolved, even if they didn't say so directly. And service quality, we look at things like clarity, helpfulness, and how quickly the team or Fin responded to the customer. So the model takes all of that information and it scores the conversations from 1 through 5, and we'll show you that distribution. But we'll also roll that up for you into your CX score. So for this customer, 76% of conversations scored either a 4 or a 5. And just below all of these scores, we'll show you how this is plotting over time. That way you can quickly spot trends and understand what's improving or what's slipping. And if you've made changes to how your team works, this view helps you see their impact right away. For example, if you roll out new Fin tasks or tweak a teammate workflow, you'll quickly see whether scores trend up or down week over week. This report is purely focused on the customer experience. We've removed surveys from the dashboard to keep the signal clear. Of course, survey data is still available elsewhere where you need it, but we believe the CX score is what should be front and center. It's the most complete and reliable indicator of the experience that you and your team are delivering. But CX is not just about the top-line score. If you want to dig into a specific conversation, you can. Each rated conversation includes a summary explaining why it received that score. Here, for example, we've got a conversation rated a 4. The summary shows you exactly what went well, so you can learn from it and share it with the team. As you saw, the CX score represents a fundamental shift in how teams measure quality. Using AI, it evaluates every customer conversation to give you a complete view into your customer experience. And CX is live for Fin customers today. And it's everywhere, featured in the overall CX report we started on, the Fin Performance Report, the New Topics Explorer, and the optimized dashboards. It's even in the Intercom inbox, so you can report and take action in real time. Thanks for watching.